So welcome, and I want to say a massive, big welcome, hello to our guest today, which is Andy. Hello, Andy.
Hello, Matt, and hello, everybody.
Just to introduce Andy, Andy has a master's in counselling psychology. He's an LTA accredited plus level 4 coach, and that's a senior coach. He's got over 20 years experience with the inner game of tennis developed by Timothy Galway. I've got the book here. It's been on my regular on my bookshelf for many a year. A brilliant book. If you haven't read it, then please do get a chance to read it. They'll be in the follow-up resources. Andy is an inner game global facilitator. As mentioned, been working for over 20 years. And Andy, I was talking to you before. I know you describe yourself as a coaching psychologist. So I know we're very excited to hear about that.
Yeah, we were looking for a title yesterday, weren't we? But, probably both of those, yeah.
After that intro, we've got a set of questions, Andy. I know we've spoken before, and we like to do a little bit of research and go through the session earlier. And what we tend to like to ask all of our guests initially is kind of, how and why did you get into tennis initially?
Well, how I got in, I remember finding some rackets in my parents' conservatory and being interested in what they were. And then I think my mum sort of showed me what you do with one. So she showed me about bouncing a ball on a racket. And then I just remember hitting against the garage wall or the garage door, aka Borg style, because I understand that's what he did. And that's probably what we did in the 70s. Then I went to park courts, played on park courts. I won the school championship 3 times. I went to work for Taylor Woodrow, who were one of the probably only providers of indoor courts just before David Lloyd built his centre in 1981. And in fact, I used to play on a Sunday afternoon with a friend of mine. And then on the next court, David Lloyd, Sue Barker and Virginia Wade used to turn up and hit next to us, which was very interesting. And I suppose our first coaching qualification I did in when I was 21.
Brilliant. And the what's your biggest claim to fame then? Is it that school championships?
Probably. Yeah.
I like you being loud. Yeah. You still got the trophy hidden somewhere. I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. And I've got my own notes here, and forgive me if I'm making notes. I like to scribble. I'm a learner as well as we go through here, Andy. So how did you get into the inner game then? Because that's fine. I mean, most of us on the call, there'll be coaches from all over the country here. So level 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and like myself, 5s. And we're all going to be coaching. We'll be outdoors, indoors, many of us kind of in the elements, etc. What is it that brought you from your coaching, going through your qualifications, then to find this inner game and this sort of psychology aspects of it?
Yeah, so there was an advert that came through the post from the BTCA to become an inner tennis tutor in 2002. And it was being run by a guy called Sir John Whitmore, who is probably, or unfortunately not with us now, but he was the leading world business coach, if you like. And his ideas had stemmed from Tim Galway's ideas, because he trained with Tim in California, and he brought the inner game back to the UK. And then he sort of developed coaching in business. So he trained us up as coaches, and there were probably about 20 of us at the time. And what was most interesting on that course was that we were introduced to a way of coaching which was about asking for the person's experience. So rather than sort of giving instructions and trying to correct people, it opened my eyes to another way that we could go about coaching, which was to ask for their experience. And one of the first questions I remember asking was, what do you notice? And the funny thing was, when I asked that question, people could reply and tell me, oh, I'm noticing the ball hit my strings and it feels a bit strange, or I felt a little bit off balance then. So then it sort of got me interested in, there is another way to learn to play tennis. And I'd searched for this for quite a while myself. And I used to get quite frustrated as a coach. I used to be trying hard to fix people and help them. And I'd come off and I thought, surely there's another way to go about learning. And when I discovered the inner game, that sort of set me on this path, which I've been on now for about 20 years.
And you mentioned around kind of, it's interesting because I think as coaches, us on the call, you know, we're all clearly passionate about the game. Probably similar story to yourselves about how we kind of maybe played, we got involved, we maybe competed, and then fell into coaching as similar to yourself by the sounds of it. And then you happen to stumble upon this inner game. Interesting. You mentioned around the kind of hard, you know, we work hard. I think all of us here are probably fall into that trap of fixing people. We're problem solvers, aren't we? We see people, we want them to be better, we want them to be the best they can be, and see success and try to fix. And you mentioned around kind of giving instruction.
Yeah, yeah.
What was the big kind of change then for you and your coach? You mentioned around kind of asking that question around how do you notice, but can you go through that kind of that transition? What were you like before when you were coaching, and then what were you like after this course?
Yeah, so it's quite a journey actually, because I was working with what you might refer to as the medical model. So there'll be a problem, I'd come up with a solution, and then I'd try to fix it. So I was trying to fix something around somebody's technique by giving instructions and then some feedback. And then I went on a journey of only asking questions, because Sir John Whitmore, who was in business coaching, that was his niche, was to ask effective questions, to raise awareness, to create responsibility in the learner. So I went on a journey for a few years of doing that and got myself into a bit of trouble, because people said, what, you mean you can't tell? And I was on this journey where I thought, no, this is what I'd learned from John. But then I came across David Henry, who was also into this coaching and trained with Tim Galway, who introduced us to the coaching dance, which meant that depending on the needs of the individual that you're working with, or the situation, or the group that you're working with, you would be directive or non-directive. So it wasn't just about asking questions. Then later I started to work with Tim Galway, and what I realized, it's about raising the awareness of the other person to evoke change and learning. So you can do that directively and non-directively. And that sits really nicely, because you might notice that something technically that could help the person, that you could help the person to change for the better. But rather than give a direct instruction to do it like this, you could ask them just to pay attention to, say, their contact point or the distance to the side. And through their own experience, they start to find what works and what feels good to them. And for me, it's a very humane way of coaching, rather than us being seen as the experts and sort of telling, this is from our own perspective how to do it. And I know there's a big shift in coaching now where people are starting to explore this area, but it became about awareness. So if somebody gets more information about what they're currently doing, then the change starts to happen. And for me, that's where the magic is. When you have somebody who's totally focused on paying attention to an area that they're interested in, it means their mind is quiet and the body is innately intelligent, and it starts to self-correct. So that's where I am with it. I've gone sort of full circle in terms of communication, so that yes, I can direct an awareness, I can give an awareness instruction, but I can also ask. And I think that when you ask somebody, you're then working with their awareness and their experience. And they feel more in charge then of their learning. They start to own their learning. And you're just acting as a facilitator and a guide. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think I'm going to talk about my own personal practice. I think, myself as a young coach has probably fell into the similar trap of, right, error correction, that's wrong, this is it, this is how you should do it. And they do it, but they never quite understand what's going wrong. And I think you described it very well there, when it's all around that kind of, how does that feel? Or the question of what do you notice, and allowing them to feel and find a solution themselves. And that awareness piece you mentioned there, I think is very powerful, in the way that if they're aware of what they need to do, or what it feels like, what's going wrong, then they can make that adjustment themselves, and therefore that learning becomes more owned by them, which becomes more sticky. And actually out in a competition world where they're going out, we've got a mini red player, for instance, who understands the feeling of hitting a ball cross court and what that means, rather than the angles of incident and everything we might be able to throw at them, then it might actually work in a match situation as well.
Yeah.
And you mentioned around the directive, non-directive. Can you just clarify that a little bit more? Because I know that's a bit of a continuum in the way that we communicate.
Yeah. So if you are able to be non-directive and to ask the person for their experience, then you are starting to give them choice and responsibility. So when I ask that question, what do you want to do today? Oh, I'd like to work on my backhand topspin down the line. Okay, how should we set that up? The choice is with the learner. Okay, so is that what you'd like to explore? Yes. Okay, so off they go and they hit some balls. And as they say they want to get more power on their topspin shot down the line, they'll hit some balls, and then after a while I might just stop and just say, what are you noticing at the moment? Is there anything you're noticing that's helping you to create the power? Just have a little conversation. And generally people, once they feel safe with you asking those questions, they start to respond. And they start to say, oh yes, I noticed I'm getting power, I'm turning a little bit more, or I'm hitting it further away, the contact feels good. So then I might ask them, well, out of those three things you've just noticed, which one's most interesting to you? Which one's standing out in your attention? And they might say, oh, it's the contact point, or it might be the distance aside. But whatever it is, I'll say to them, well, how about exploring that area then? And maybe we could scale it. Maybe we could, if it's the contact point, maybe you could just notice, is it position 1 where it's level with your shoe, your front shoe? Is it 2 just a bit in front, or is it 3 further in front? Or you could come up with a scale yourself. So the choice is with the learner, and it's that choice combined with awareness which then helps that person to trust in themselves, in their inner resources. As I said, the body's innately intelligent when the mind is quiet. Now, when somebody's focused on noticing their contact point, that's all they're focused on. And so the mind is quiet, the body is free to hit the ball. And when that happens, and I've said this just a little moment ago, the magic happens for them and for me, because that's what makes coaching so interesting for me, is to see the magic. The magic is natural learning. So natural learning happens when you allow it to. But as I mentioned a little while ago, with traditional coaching, there isn't any chance of becoming aware because you're trying to obey what the person's telling you to do. So when you're doing that and there isn't any awareness, it makes learning really difficult. So learning has to happen by in the moment noticing what you notice, being aware of what it feels like, what position your body's in, and seeing the outcome of the shot. And those three principles, awareness, choice, and trust, are the key principles of the inner game. So awareness is about knowing your present moment with clarity. Choice is about moving in a desired direction of the future. So you have that choice. We talked about this the other day, that the inner game goes way beyond tennis, because it's about humans and about us, and about us having choice about how we lead our lives, where we put our attention. But to get in touch with that, you have to be more conscious, more aware. So this is why I see the key principle of awareness as being quite critical, because from awareness comes everything else. So the more aware you are, the more you can see your choices about where you put your attention, what your goals are, what you're noticing. And if you've got a facilitative coach, they can guide you then into the area that you're interested in observing. So on a tennis court, is it your movement? Is it your balance that you're noticing? What would you like to get? Would you like to get more power, more spin? So if a coach is able to do this, they can help accelerate learning. But like you said earlier, the learning becomes more robust, and the person owns the learning. So they start trusting in their inner resources, which is in themselves, basically. And once they do that, that leads to confidence, which then leads to self-belief. So part of my role as a coach really is to reduce those interferences that people might have when they're learning. And I haven't talked about this, and I'm sure the people listening in will know this, but what two main interferences is overthinking and overtrying. And when people are learning, and you'll say giving them information, they would try hard to do that, and they'll be thinking about that. But this is all interference, and I'm always looking when I'm coaching for interference. And I might not have said anything. The people that come to my lessons are already have that mind which is conditioned to overthink, to try hard, to issue instructions like make sure you bend your knees, or you should have hit the ball more in front then. There's always an internal dialogue going on, which Tim Galway called self-one. And my role as a coach is to notice when a player that I'm working with has got that, and to try and reduce that so that they play more from self-two, which, as I mentioned, is this intelligent system, which is our bodies, with all its coordinated mechanisms. Lots of capacities inside of all of us that some of them we've actualized, some of them we haven't. So those capacities I work with. I might be rambling here a bit, but let me give you an example. So I had a coach on a course that said to me, I get really nervous up in the net when I'm volleying. So I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, when I come into volley, I sort of freeze. So we had a discussion around it, and I said to her, why don't you just, I noticed she looked a little bit timid. Why don't you see if you can feel the quality of assertiveness in you? And I'd like you to play a rally feeling assertive. Don't try and think how you might be assertive, just feel it in your body. So she's hitting at the baseline, feeling this quality of assertiveness. And then she came in and volleyed, and it was a really assertive volley. And I said, what did you notice about that? She said, well, that felt great. What I'd done, you might think I tricked her, but I helped her to actualize a capacity that's inside all of us to be assertive, but we might not practice being assertive. There was her chance to practice being assertive, and out of it came a volley, which she didn't think she could play. So that's an example of how you could use the inner game to access more self-two and reduce self-one. Because self-one, she was really nervous, really scared, and that obviously helped her.
Yeah, and just going to go through this quickly, because obviously you mentioned quite a bit around these principles of the inner game. So I think it's just worth noting that I agree that actually this general psychology, yes, it's great for tennis, and it just picks it very well in Timothy Galway's book. But I agree it works well for life generally around having a general awareness of our own consciousness and how we go out in the world ourselves and our own lives. The mention you mentioned, well, the bit you mentioned there around awareness, and that's self-one, self-two. So just for me to summarize, self-one is that thinking brain, that often that inner critic, that's analyzing and often paralyzing us. And then the self-two is that innate feeling through the body of actually being.
That's right. So self-one is something that we all have. So through society and through conditioning, we've internalized what others have said to us. And as we mentioned and alluded to a little while ago, the way that we go about learning things has been for somebody that's an expert to tell us what we need to do. So we run a dialogue which can get in the way when it starts to instruct us as a ball's coming towards us. Make sure you get the racket back early, step in, keep your wrist firm, don't forget to follow through. And then it might castigate us a little bit and tell us, what did you do that for, you idiot? But we all have that voice, and it's an inner voice that we run, which is not helpful. But self-two, when self-one is quiet, and self-two, like you said, is all of the human body, if you like, can actually perform extremely high levels. I mean, when we watch high levels of performance, people say, well, I wasn't really thinking of anything. And you see fantastic performances from people. So self one is that inner critic, as you said. It's the one that we've all got. Comes from parents, comes from teachers, comes from society. Self two is what you see in young children before they go to school, before they're told how to hold their pencils, and before they're told that to pay attention by looking forward to the classroom. So there's a lot of judgment in that as well. My son says, well, I'm listening, I'm looking out the window, and the teacher's always telling me to look forwards. And I said, well, why didn't you just tell her that you listen better looking out the window? But I think the thing about humans is we like to be in control, and self one is very much wants to be in control. It wants to control the way you move your body to hit a tennis ball. And going further than that, people in the world want to control what's going on in the world. So they start to do certain things in the world which we know about. But it's a human condition, really. But when we play sport, if we can help just quieten that down, the body, it is, as I said, it's fantastic what it can do.
Right, so that leads us on nicely, Andy. So we've gone through the key principles: awareness, choice, trust. Awareness all around quietening that self one, that inner critic, that inner dialogue, that thinking mind, and allowing more of that self two, which is more free and self and being. So what hinders and helps our players then? How do we stop that interference? I don't know if you want me to share a slide here as well. I know we've got a few in the background.
Yeah, so fundamentally it's paying attention, because if you can pay attention to something that's interesting, relevant and observable. Now, what's interesting, relevant and observable when you play tennis? Obviously the ball is the racket, the body. And so once you start to pay attention to something that you're noticing, or your players are noticing, as I mentioned earlier, so you might have to ask your players what they're noticing, but equally you could direct awareness onto the ball. So I could say to people, I could ask them to do the bounce hit exercise, for example, which increases their awareness for the ball. But I could say to them, go out and hit some balls and just tell me what you notice about the ball, what aspect of the ball. So it could be spin, speed, could be the shades of color on the ball. Don't think about what you're going to go and look for. Just go out and see what you notice. And so they hit some balls, they come in, I say, what did you notice? And this person says, oh, I noticed the colors on the ball. But what did you notice? I noticed the spin on the ball. So when they start to pay attention to what's interesting and relevant to them to achieve a rally, they're focusing their attention on the ball, which is extremely relevant. Then the mind self one quietens down. When we're looking to do, when the technical changes, sometimes I suggest, sometimes I suggest something. But I mostly go to see if I can help them become aware themselves. So I'll go into is there anything you've noticed when you're doing your forehands there? Because I want to grow the quality of self-awareness in my players. Because self-awareness combined with responsibility, that feeling that you're in control of your learning and in control of you going that far, is what I feel leads to champions, if you like, to people that are very successful. They know what they need to do. They believe in their inner resources, themselves, and they can just do it. But where you pay your attention is what you pay attention to is important, and it changes. So even when I'm coaching, I might think the person's just told me they're focusing on what it feels like when the ball hits their strings or where it hits on their strings. But then after, you just know when people's attention is shifted somewhere else, because they come off of, say, monitoring where the ball hit on their strings. And then you might say, where's your attention now? Is it still on what you said to me a little while ago? Oh, no, I've just noticed my footwork. I noticed that when I put my foot here, that really helps. So to be aware also of how people's attention shifts, and our attention shifts all the time, especially with modern technology. But on a tennis court, if you can help people focus their attention on things that are relevant and most importantly interesting to them, we start to see results.
And I know there's a bit of an equation you have for this as well.
Oh yeah, do you want to show it? I don't know.
Yeah, go on.
Oh yeah, it's got quite a lot on it. So that sums up nicely what we're talking about. So self one residing here, giving instructions, commands, making judgments about our performance. Self two, the body. The inner game formula there, that's from Tim Galway, is that our performance equals potential minus interference. So there are two ways we can go about increasing performance. One is to increase our potential, so our tennis skills, our athletic skills. And the other way to go about increasing performance is to reduce interference. The trying hard, this is in lessons, the trying hard, the thinking too much. In matches, it might be feeling overly nervous, feeling a bit of self-doubt. Interference can be external, could be parents watching, and then it could be others watching, and I've got to play well to impress my parents, for example, all interferences. So what the inner game formula here is saying that if we can learn to reduce interference, then we see more potential, which is equal to more performance. So I think it's a nice formula that you can have in your minds, even when you're working with somebody, not just in tennis. What's getting in the way of somebody? As humans, we have a tendency to get in our own way. So we also have a lot more potential than we realize. But equally, we all get in our own way a bit. We all interfere. And so this formula is quite nice to look at when we're looking to help somebody get a higher level of performance.
So that's the P equals P minus I, which sounds quite
Not PPI.
mathematical, doesn't it? But
yeah.
I can probably imagine that. I'm going to stop sharing there. I hope you've all made notes of that. But I think we can all probably feel or know of players that we feel kind of really do just go out and are quite brave. They don't seem to have anything blocking them or that match point or break point down. They seem to just be able to play and not get in their own way. And obviously we can think of some absolute greats, your Serena Williams, your Roger Federers, who seem to go out and just perform regardless. And that, particularly when you mentioned about that self one being in the head, and the image does that really well. Yeah. But those players seem to all be in that self two, in that actually being and playing and taking out those, particularly external, when you can think about the interferences of the actual situation, the interferences of your own overthinking. And you think about the psychology of choking, when actually it's just overthinking of, as you mentioned, right, I really want this point, right, what do I need to do? Back it back, contact in front, follow through, trying to get this ball down the line to their backhand. But as you overthink, you go back into a beginner.
You do. The mother skill of the inner game is relaxed concentration, which if you can achieve that, and it doesn't just happen by somebody shouting from the side of the court, come on, relax. You have to train relaxation.
I'm not sure. I'm sure we've had a few parents like that.
Yeah, exactly. So it has to be trained. And one of the best ways to train it is through breathing exercises, but monitoring how relaxed you are in your body, so that you're learning how to play with relaxation. But I think it's more to play with less tension than relaxation, because you don't want to be lying down, but you want to be free of the tension. And if you feel the tension, you can go back to perhaps some breathing exercises. So having awareness would help you to achieve that, because you'd be aware that you're tight in a match. So you'd say, okay, I need to breathe now. But if you're looking over at your coach's bench, what do I do now for answers? That's not helpful. That's why growing self-awareness is so important. I was going to say something else there. We'll come back. Sorry.
No.
It was on those lines that you just mentioned about relaxed concentration. So where do you pay attention to? So you feel relaxed in your body. That's great. So where do you pay attention? Are you still thinking, or are you just noticing when the person serves? You're just looking there. You're just looking at the serve. You're taking that in, trusting yourself because you've worked on this, that then you can play the ball. It sounds simple. I mean, Federer said when he was playing, what he said, I think his quote was, "When I'm playing my best tennis, I'm just seeing the ball." Now that sounds simple, but it's very profound, because I'm just seeing the ball means that's all there is to it. So he's trained to such a way that he knows that when he gets into that mode, that sounds to me like he's in the zone as well, in the flow state. And the inner game is very closely linked to this, because when you play from self two, it means that you're allowing things to happen. You're not trying to control things, which is self one. Get the racket back, make sure you bend your knees. You're just playing. You're just playing the game. It sounds simple, but it has to be trained. So train it with awareness, choice, trust, but enjoy your experience too. And you do enjoy it. When you're paying attention in the moment and the mind is quiet, you do enjoy what you're doing. This is what we're all trying to see.
Brilliant. And so we've gone through those, that formula around how we can increase that performance. And you mentioned around that kind of relaxed concentration you mentioned, which we're all trying to achieve probably in our own lives as well. Those on the call, please do ask any questions as we go, because we're going to be moving over to them very shortly. So any questions you might have, Randy, put them in now, because we have someone on the call who'll be curating them and passing them to me. Andy, so we mentioned around the sort of the player-centered or the child-centered approach then. I feel like you've probably touched upon a lot of this already. So what does that really mean then?
Well, it's interesting to talk about being child-centered. The most I've seen, not the most, but I see quite often places saying we're child-centered. But what that really means is they've given children access to the tennis courts. We're child-centered. So we have children at 4 to 6 and Saturday morning. But child-centered coaching is different. And the reason I called it child-centered coaching, and it's really person-centered coaching, because it's about all of us, not just children. I have an interest in helping children to become self-aware and self-responsible, because as they grow into adulthood, they're two really key qualities. So being child-centered means going back to the principles of the inner game, awareness, choice, and trust. Is under choice is making the learner the person in charge of the learning choices. That to me is child-centered. So if I ask a child, what do you want to do today? And they tell me, and how do you want to set that up? They tell me, and I'm facilitating. And I'm saying to them, what's your experience? I might say, what was it like when you hit that ball? Because obviously you've got to use language, but the language I'm trying to use is to engage the learner with, and show that I trust in them. I trust in their potential. The P equals P minus I. I trust their potential. And I know that when I can reduce those interferences that they could have, their parents are watching and they keep looking over. But if I can get their attention on something, whether it's the ball, whether they saw the logo, all they've got to do is say yes or no if they saw the logo. There's no right or wrong in that. And I make them aware of that too. Then they start to perform, and it becomes child-centered coaching. I think a lot of kids think that they can feel that there is a right and wrong to things. And I take that away, because I just said about that example with the ball. So if I throw a ball to a child and I say, just tell me, do you see the logo on the ball, yes or no? And if you don't see it, it doesn't matter. I'm only interested in them looking, because I know when they start to look at the ball, they'll start hitting it. But in their minds, if they said, oh no, I didn't see it, and then they get a little bit worried about that, because that's conditioning. They've been conditioned to think there is a right and a wrong way to do it. But my approach is very non-judgmental. So they're saying yes, no, no, and I'm saying good, okay, yes, no, just encouraging, and then they start hitting the ball really well. So non-judgmental awareness is part of being child-centered as well. There's a question. Is that a question?
No, sorry, don't worry. We'll come to that. Don't worry. Don't worry.
Yeah.
We'll look after that bit.
Righty. So it's that what I feel is that I really want to just reduce that, so take the right and the wrong away, just be in awareness, support them. So child-centered coaching is around that. In big groups, I have to set the task. I mean, when we first started training in the inner game, we did want to try and ask everybody in the group what they'd want to work on, and it became impossible. So it might be today we're working on hitting a ball that sort of is hitting with depth on an orange ball, just hitting with depth, height over the net. We can ask awareness around that. We can ask people to become aware of their racket swings, how long, where's the ball hitting on their strings, what's the height the ball's clearing the net, with lots of things that they could pay attention to. And again, we're growing awareness in these players who are people. And when they develop the skill of self-awareness, it goes into other areas of their life, not just in the tennis court.
Yeah, I think you bring up some really good points. I mean, I think particularly with children, when you mentioned obviously child-centered and getting them to own their learning as well. You mentioned around kind of, I would probably call it like a no-fail environment, where they feel safe to fail. With many of the kids I've worked on National Tennis Centre or outside, I tend to call it the Angry Birds with them. They've obviously played Angry Birds, and they have infinite amount of goes on that level. And there's no fail; you just keep going. And and your idea is we're trying. So actually, we encourage failure on the court, and then to them to trust themselves that they will get there. But through that experience, I completely agree with that. And then and I suppose that kind of moves us on to the next point, which is we've got some questions coming, so I want to make sure we get to them. Is we've got that child-centered approach. We're focusing on them and their own awareness, as you've mentioned. Within a group situation, I think you're right that actually from good to great is actually you have a theme, you have we're talking at depth, but actually going around and having everyone having their own teaching point, which might be actually someone is wanting to contact further in front, someone is wanting to have a path which is much higher, or they're feeling that actually their footwork, they need to get in a position to be able to hit this shot, they're off balance. That is
where the question might be to those children, what are you noticing about your path then, Josh? And what are you noticing about your footwork? And sometimes just ask that question, just leave them with it. You don't need to add any more in than that, because that will raise awareness.
Brilliant. And you've come through a load of practical ideas for us already, but just are there any other top tips or any summary for yourself before we go to the questions?
Not at the moment, but they'll probably come back in a minute.
Perfect. So I believe we've got some come through. Let's have a look what we've got through here. So they're coming through. Thanks, Jason, for sending it through to my phone as well. We've got quite a long one here, actually. So we've got a question from Andy Aitken. Question around the in-between of points. Any advice on the use of 3 Rs after points have been played? I currently try to instruct players, especially 10 and under, when to use this process after potentially playing a point where emotion gets the better of them. Would you advise this should be more autonomous and about emotions and technique / tactical error, even from an early age when they may not fully understand why they are using the 3 Rs? Hope that makes some sense.
And 3 Rs,
yeah, Andy, I don't know if you're there. I mean, I know the 3 Rs is already read, react, but is it? I feel like it might be more psychological based for yourself there, Andy. We'll wait for Andy to come back to us on that. From Jean Blake, how can you reduce interference in a match situation, specifically when parents are watching and reactive to what's happening in front of them?
I suppose number one is remove the parent. But But actually, what you could help the child to do is to learn to focus their attention through practice, so that they are able to block those interferences out. So a lot of the exercises, a lot of the training I do is around learning to focus attention, and to focus attention in a way which is relaxed. It's not forced. Okay, so when I talked about relaxed focus, you don't want to say, now come on, focus, come on, like this. You want to choose something that you know is interesting to you, where you know you can hold your attention on it. So if you do the bounce hit exercise in matches, and you can keep your attention on it, just to play yourself in, just so you start to feel that, okay, now I'm feeling quite confident now. So it's a practice. So I think what Jean was asking me there was that the question, there isn't a quick fix to it, unless the quick fix is to get rid of the parents. The players have to train these qualities, these skills, and do it with awareness.
Thank you, Andy. Because I think that's something that we probably all, as coaches, often find in our situations when kids go and play, because obviously parents are obviously the only ones often around that have taken them or watched them in that tournament. So I think it's very good advice. When do you, so this is from Dan, when do you use more of a direct approach over building awareness? Speaks of sort of age, stage, performance level. He's noticed some adult players in particular still really want you just to give them the answer. Yeah,
absolutely. And if we come back to choice, so the adults want the answer, then I give it to them. Their choice, isn't it? Their choice. But if I want to help somebody develop the self-awareness, this attribute, which is tremendously empowering, I might subtly sort of suggest things to them. So say, okay, so you want me to tell you what went wrong then? Okay. I can tell you what went wrong from my perspective, but what might be even more powerful is for you to see if you could notice what it felt like, what went wrong. Would you like to just explore that for a moment? But then they might want to be told, so then I'll tell them. So I think it's a balance, and it depends on what your intentions are as a coach and what you want to build in your players. Does that an answer to the question? I can't remember.
Yeah, so it's around the age, stage, and performance.
Yeah,
so it's a direct approach over building awareness.
Yeah, so directing awareness would be perhaps looking at the technical things that we might want to pay attention to, like contact point and balance, and what else would we be looking at? Body rotation, etc., using the body. But we can bring awareness to those instructions. So rather than saying, okay, try and rotate your body a bit more on your forehand, keep the racket on this side, etc. Just ask them, for example, how much are you rotating your upper body on a clock scale? Is that 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock? That would be bringing awareness in. And I would try and bring awareness in. Don't forget, we were born with awareness and we had this knocked out of us. So as young children, we were very aware. Then we lost it. So when you talk about young children, it's still there, really. It's just below the surface. What they're trying hard to do is trying hard to please us, trying hard to do things they think are right. So I would say bring awareness in with any age, really. Just see what happens when you do it. Does it create interference, or is it helping natural learning? So if it's creating a bit of interference, you might need to change. You might need to ask another question. You might need to show them. But be mindful of the impact that your communication has, really.
Yeah, and I think it's been a big shift. Things like the LTA youth programs come out. That's all about external focus. So we look about red and blue. We talk about shoes. Obviously, something is external to their body that they can focus on. They can't always internalize, therefore something external, whether it's the contact point in front of shoes or
The logo on
as
the
you mentioned, or the shorts, skirt, whatever it may be.
Yeah, so the external focus is great. So if you wanted to bring awareness to it, say on serve, if you've got the logo on your t-shirt and you want them to get the logo facing more to the further back it goes, the more rotation they get, you could ask them where their logo was when they served. Was it at the back fence? Was it at the floodlight post? Was it at that fence over there? Just have a go. The bit I haven't mentioned today is this: just have a go, but notice. So when I ask players to, for example, perhaps they want to, I'd like to, I know that if they rotate a little bit more, might get a bit more power in their serve. So I just say, just have a go at your serve, but just stay aware of how much your upper body rotates. Asking people to let go and just have a go frees them up, and they know that you trust them. Then they become aware of how much they're turning their shoulders. And this is how the natural learning happens.
And I think that probably moves on quite nicely to another question that we've had come in from Simon around: how does one observe their actions whilst maintaining a high level of intensity?
How does
one observe their actions while maintaining a high level of intensity?
So it depends. Well, so they are what I think Simon's mentioning is that they're noticing something in their awareness. So they're just paying attention to that, but they're keeping the effort up. Okay? So when you're paying attention to something, whether it's being directed to you by the coach and you're paying attention to the height you're making contact with the ball or whatever it is, or your footwork, it's the effort will be there, because when you pay attention and the mind is quiet, the body moves much freer. The intensity will be there. Intensity goes when people are forcing and when they're trying too hard. But there's a difference between trying and effort. It doesn't take trying to run across the baseline. It takes effort. And focusing attention should keep the intensity up, really.
So they go hand in hand, basically. So trying to have that awareness. Yeah, no, and Simon's Parsons, thank you. So yeah, thank you. And just to go back to what's mentioned earlier from Andy, you meant the 3 R's being releasing an emotion at the end of the point, reviewing the point, and then being ready for the next one. So the question is based around between points. It's how does that 10 and under player kind of reset? And you spoke about self 1, self 2. Obviously, after losing that point, self 1's probably quite hyperactive. How do we get those children to kind of reset before going back onto that point?
Yeah, absolutely. Rather than keep telling them, to keep doing the 3 R's, have them learn it and then have them aware of when to use it. Because I've seen this happen a lot. So people will keep saying, make sure you do it after each point. If somebody's in the flow state and it's all going quite well, they don't, and they're aware it's going well, they just want to keep playing the game. I think when you want to call upon these things when there is some stress, when there is some self-doubt, then you want to go back and you want to breathe, you want to release, you want to have a plan of what you're going to, whether you're going to breathe through this point or notice the height of the ball over the net, something to keep your attention. So I would go along those lines of very effective thing to use between points to reset, but don't insist that they use it all the time. Let them choose when they use it too, and see if they can be aware enough to choose it when they need it.
So it all comes back to that awareness again from which I know I'm myself as a coach, I'm sure other coaches there thinking, yeah, but they're kids. I mean, they're not aware. But as you mentioned earlier, like we do have that innate awareness that we're born with. It's just tapping back into that.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, it's definitely there. Yeah.
Brilliant. And we've probably got time for one or two more. Andy's just picked up on around the parents. I know we jokingly said around removing the parents, which I know is not something that we would do, but he mentioned around kind of bringing the parents on board to understand that psychology as well. Is that something important
Yes,
in your own practice as well?
Definitely. And this way of going about learning, I've noticed a lot of parents have come across it in their workplace. So they are quite familiar with it. I mean, the inner game has been around for 50 years and it's been in business for about 40 years. There are those parents go to workplaces, they will be familiar with perhaps somebody trying to do some coaching with them at work. So I do have conversations with them. I explain that this is a way of learning which is more natural, and it might not look like what you're expecting to see, because we're expecting something that we've seen for the past 40 or 50 years. This is an approach where I believe in your child's potential and I'm helping them focus attention, and I'm also helping them to reduce perhaps feeling a bit nervous in matches, and helping them not to think that they're doing things wrong, because I want them to learn. It's all about learning.
Yeah, and there's a couple other questions that come in, but I think that kind of, we haven't got time to go through them, unfortunately, but I know we'll send out your email afterwards if anyone has any specific questions, but it kind of answers, I think, a couple other questions that come in around that, that allowing, almost that permission for them to fail, and that awareness within matches that if there's any technique or whatever it may be, for them to go out and try. You mentioned that earlier about just trying, being and failing, and that's okay.
Yes, just have a go, let go. And when I say let go, I mean let go of self-one that wants to control you, that wants to tell you how to do it. Just hit some balls, but stay aware of what you're noticing. This can go for all of us in matches too. We all play tennis as well as coach. When you're out hitting a ball, just let go of what that mind's telling you to do with the racket and just see what you notice. You'll be surprised. And then put your attention on what you're noticing. I was out in the cold weather, can I just say this, just before Christmas in the cold weather, hitting some balls with a mate of mine, and it was cold, and I thought, oh, I'm not sure I want to be out here today. But I became interested because I all of a sudden noticed the balls were like rocks. They were hitting my racket. And I thought, this has given me something to pay attention to. These balls feel like rocks hitting my racket. So I just decided to notice on my backhand where they were hitting on my racket. And it totally distracted self-one. It got me hitting through my backhands. I was becoming very accurate. I enjoyed the experience. What more can you want?
And I think that's what a wonderful way to finish. I mean, I don't know about other people on the call, but I now just want to get out on court and just hit freely, and not worry about what anyone else is thinking or seeing, or whether someone next door is judging me whether I've missed my shot, but actually just to have a go and enjoy. And actually those players that play freely are the ones that I know I looked at as a junior, but like, how are they doing that? They don't look like they care at all. They've lost the point, they move on, and they just play with this absolute confidence. And I think today, Andy, you've really done a good job at explaining how we can help entice that out of our players that we work with. Yeah. And so thank you.
Stay aware.
So a few notes, obviously I've been scribbling, I'm sure many other people have as well. Mentioned the key principles: awareness, choice and trust, around the inner game. Huge piece around that awareness, that self-one, self-two. Reducing that interference.
Yes, look out when you're coaching, just look out for focus in your players or interference, because everything we say or do with our players will create either focus or interference. And if it's creating interference, then maybe you could just see what that interference is and see if we can help focus again.
Brilliant. And as I was going on to, we spoke about what hinders and helps our performance, the learning and enjoyment you mentioned there, and also you tapped into how, you know, delivering that child-centered approach and making them the center of their learning, and asking those really kind of intriguing, curious questions for them to be able to feel what they're doing and raise that level of awareness and be able to play freely. So Andy, thank you so much.
really nicely summarised, Matt.
Well, the good thing is, I mean, as anyone who comes onto our webinars, we really enjoy having them, and it comes from a general interest for myself and everyone else. And you know, it's coming through now. Some people really enjoy the psychological side, which we don't often tap into in these. So I think it's really important, we ourselves as coaches and players ourselves, and also passing on to other players. So Andy, massive thank you from us. I'm just going to share my screen again. If there's anything you want to say, Andy, yourself.
No, thank you everybody for listening, and please get in touch if you've got any questions. Yeah.
So I'm just going to share screen. If people need to leave, I understand. We've just hit past. CPD, I mean, this is one that we run this through the year, one every month. We've got obviously on-court workshops that we run for the LTA. We've got external workshops like Andy's, coaching kids self-belief. Coach mentoring, Andy's a mentor, I'm a mentor, and a lot of particularly directive, non-directive, and the coaching comes through mentoring as well. So if you want to tap into that, we have our forums and our coach network events that run through the year. Independent learning, any external courses that you may go on, obviously online courses as well through the LTA course search tool. So please do continue to invest in your learning. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Our new video and all other types and forms of learning is lta.org.uk/CPD. Nice and easy for us. And just a massive thank you from Jason, who's on the call, who's been curating. Thank you, Jason, for helping out in the background. Myself and the LTA for you being here, investing in your own learning and listening to today. And then, of course, a huge thank you to our guest, Andy, today for all your knowledge around the inner game. I know it's been 20+ years of you implementing this, and I think it really shows, and it's great to be able to squeeze something out of you today.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Brilliant. And thank you, everyone on the call. Good luck. Enjoy your sessions. I'm sure you're all going to be back on court today, and hopefully you can implement some of this either in your own hitting or with some of your players. So huge thank you, and we shall see you all hopefully on the next one next month.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.